Welcome to the 24th Annual Capital Conference Virtual Edition. It is our goal that each session be about an hour in length. However, we may go a little longer or we may be shorter. My name is David Stevens. I'm the Director of Academic Activities for UIL. Also helping with this session is Glenda Munoz, Administrative Assistant for UIL Academics, who you get many emails from, but now you get to see her face. So the title of this session is Coordinators: Necessary Steps for Your Team's Success. Our presenter is Nicole Cornish. Nicole comes to us with lots of success, particularly in the speech and debate world, a lot of CX experience, CX debate. She's done a lot of stuff with the National Federation, topic writing selection, in fact, getting her topic selected as the national topic in the past. She does lots of stuff for the school. And most recently, she's been named the principal of Athens High School. So it's always good to have someone, one of us in the administration leadership ranks. And so Nicole, we're very happy to have you today. Thanks for being willing to share your wisdom and knowledge with our attendees in this new format of Capital Conference.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm glad that you are joining me, or virtually joining me, I guess, for this session. So I wanted to just kind of talk today about some of the things that I think are really important for a UIL coordinator to be successful. And so I tried to think of things as well that would be helpful for brand new coordinators to veteran coordinators as well. So I think that the biggest thing to start off your year as a UIL coordinator is to look at the budget and see what you have available to you. I also, when I'm talking to other UIL coordinators, hear this as the biggest area of concern. And so I think that as UIL coordinators, we do have to get creative and sometimes be a little scrappy and figure out how to do what we can with the budgets that we have. So one is that you should ask lots and lots of questions about your budget. So whoever that person is in your district, you want to have all of that information. Some districts will give you kind of one budget line code and everything is in there. Some districts, though, may break up your budget line codes. And so you may be really looking at managing like 3 or 4 budgets because they may have put money in supplies and they may have put a certain amount of money in student travel and a certain amount of money in teacher travel. I encourage you to look at all of that and then have conversations with the right people in your district about how much of that money is in each of those individualized budgets, because that money can be moved around even without you asking for more money. So what I've found is that sometimes the people making those decisions about where money goes are not people that have UIL experience. So for example, when I became the UIL coordinator at Athens, we had like thousands of dollars in a staff travel budget, and I had like $400 in a student travel budget. So that didn't make any sense, right? So I had to go to the appropriate person at my district and say, hey, this doesn't make sense for what we do. We really need student travel. You know, as far as staff, we really just travel like once a year to Capital Conference normally. And then know what expenses you're expected to cover. So what I mean by that is every district does things a little bit different in terms of what post-district looks like. So you want to know the answers to those questions. So for example, at my school, there's a separate post-district budget. So when I look at my UIL budget, what I'm responsible for is getting us through district competition. After that, region and state come from a different budget. But I've worked at other schools where that was not the case. So I've been the UIL coordinator in other districts where they've said, this is your budget and it needs to last you the whole way. So you want to know the answers to those questions early on. And then honestly, my advice to you is going to be spend everything you have in the budget. So whenever I started asking, when I became the UIL coordinator at Athens, I tried, like I wanted to be like a good steward of money and I wanted to be really frugal. And then when I started asking for more money, they would say things to me like, well, you haven't even spent all the money that you have in your budget the last 2 years. And I was like, well, if I do spend it, will I get more money? And the answer was, well, maybe. And so I was like, well, okay, I'm going to do that. If they're going to give me the money, then I'm going to spend everything that I have in that budget. And so before I let the year end, I usually ask, how much money do I have left? And then I go to my UIL sponsors to say, what are things that you would need to start next year? So for my math sponsor, sometimes it's new calculators. My social studies sponsor is always wanting me to get as many of next year's books for him as I can, because he wants to start those kids as early as possible. So think about those things when you get to the end as well. What are things I can spend money on that will set us up for success early on that next school year? I think that you should always advocate for your program every step of the way. But at the same time, don't get bogged down if your highest request isn't met by the district. So I always shoot for the moon, and I tell my district that I'm always going to advocate for my program, and I'm always going to ask for my dream world. But at the same time, whatever I get, I'm going to make it work, and I'm going to do what we can to make UIL successful at my school. So I think it's okay to bug people every year for more money. I think it's okay to have those conversations with people in your district, because you should absolutely advocate for your program. So you couldn't be a UIL academic coordinator if you did not have great sponsors. So it's important to find and recruit great people in your district. So one question to ask in a conversation to have in your district is it possible to provide those sponsors with some sort of stipend? I encourage you to seek data and be prepared to take that data to the people in your district that make these decisions. So I have periodically over the last several years done sort of a survey of academic coordinators in my area to know what stipends they're paying and provide that information to the people in my district that make these decisions to try to encourage them to keep us competitive. I think we probably all have in our districts the schools that we know, the school board, the superintendent, those people compare us to, right? We know who those schools are. And so I would encourage you to seek data from those schools about stipends. And when you talk to sponsors or teachers about becoming sponsors, I think you need to talk to them about the benefits that UIL creates for their students in the classroom. So a common thing that I think a lot of teachers don't know when I'm talking to them is that these UIL events are connected to TEKS that happen in the classroom. And a lot of times teachers don't know that and are sometimes more persuaded to be sponsors if they realize that, hey, me sponsoring this event is something that's going to make these students stronger in the classroom. And then you do want to be clear when you're recruiting sponsors about what your expectations are. So I think you have to kind of decide early on what works for your district. For us, there's an expectation of a certain amount of practices, that sponsors attend a certain amount of tournaments, those sorts of things. And so I never want teachers to commit to something not having all of the information. So I try to be really clear about, we want you, we think this is great for the school district, and we want you to be a sponsor, but also here's the things that you need to know and the time commitment. I would ask your campus principals to talk to all of the staff during professional development before school starts, whatever that looks like this year. Your professional development may be face-to-face, it may be virtual, but I would encourage you to ask your campus principals to talk to all of the teachers during professional development before school starts and just educate them about UIL and what UIL academic events are offered, and give them that information, because a lot of times teachers may not know much about UIL academic events. And so that will go a long way to get teachers interested in being part of the activities. And I also think, I'll talk about this a little bit more later in the presentation, but I honestly think that you should be talking to the teachers during beginning of the year professional development, even if you don't have any sponsors to recruit. So in the years where I had all of my spots filled before school even started, I still wanted to have that opportunity to talk to teachers during that professional development time, because I think that it helps celebrate your students' success whenever everyone on campus knows what UIL academics is all about and how it kind of works. So once you have sponsors, you have to recruit some students. And I think lots of people across the state have some really amazing ideas about how to recruit students. So I wish that I could say all of these were mine, but a lot of what I do as UIL coordinator, I've learned from other people at all kinds of other capital conferences. But these are the things that have stuck for us, for what we do in terms of recruiting students. So I make a door sign every year that has the UIL event and the teacher's name and when their practice time is. And we have that laminated and teachers put that outside their door. Because sometimes what happens is I'll find a kid in like February that will say, man, I heard you talk, sometime in the 8th grade about UIL math, and I was really interested in it, but I could never figure out who the UIL math sponsor was. And I'm like, man, I wish I would have known that, because now it's February and district is next month. So I started putting signs outside the teachers' doors that tell kids, hey, I'm the math sponsor. I'm who you're going to come talk to. And they write their practice times in there as well. So students don't have to go in. They don't have to interrupt class. They don't have to try to hunt that teacher down. They know, hey, the math team practices after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So maybe I'll just show up after school on Tuesday. We do host a UIL recruiting event at the beginning of the year. So here's how that works for us. I give 5 invitations to every teacher on campus. So not just UIL sponsors. I give 5 invitations to every teacher on campus, and I ask them to hand those invitations out to students that they think would be interested in UIL, students that are strong academically, students that seem to have gifts or talents in particular areas. And then they can always ask me for more. So I give them all 5 and I ask them to at least hand out 5. But they can always ask me for more. And then we make announcements as well. And so students can always come by and see me and pick up an invitation if they don't get one from a teacher. And then that invitation is their ticket out of class. So whatever time we schedule the recruiting event during the day, we'll make an announcement for interested UIL students, and they have to have that invitation to get out of class. And then they come down to the cafeteria. We usually do some kind of food. It's always dependent on what time of the day it fits in our schedule. So we've done like donuts and breakfast kind of things because it worked for in the morning. We've done ice cream because that year it's scheduled better in the afternoon. So always something to get them a little reward incentive, I guess, to come. And then we have booths set up, and each of the sponsors set up those booths with information about their particular event. And I ask them whenever possible to have returning students come and help man those tables, because I have found that kids will kind of listen to what the adults in the building have to say, but me saying, hey, UIL is really fun means nothing to a 14-year-old. But another student saying, hey, UIL is really fun suddenly means a lot. I think it's important that you talk to the students about what they're interested in, why they would want to be in UIL, and try to direct them towards those events that best fit their interests. I think you also have to really put forth an effort to make sure that teachers know what qualities we're looking for in UIL academic students. That helps them when it's time for them to hand out invitations. They're not just sort of handing out their 5 invitations to whoever. You've kind of talked to them about, here are all of the UIL academic events, and here's the type of student that would be strong in those areas. And certainly I think it's important to talk to students about the scholarship opportunities that are available to them. So students, certainly once they're in high school, they start having conversations in some of their classes about college and what that's going to look like. And so they start getting more and more interested in scholarships. So it can be persuasive to get a student involved in UIL if they know that there's scholarship opportunities available for them. I think that there is certainly a misunderstanding, I think, that exists. So like, if you want scholarships, you should play sports, and certainly athletics are great for some people, but I try to share even my own personal experience with students that I was a TILF recipient and it paid for a lot of college for me. And so I try to share kind of that personal experience that they really can get TILF scholarship money, and it can be really beneficial to them in college. All right, so once you've got, you know what your budget is, you've got sponsors, you've got students, kind of the next step for a UIL coordinator is to kind of figure out answers to these 3 questions about resources, practices, and tournaments. So you've got to think about what resources you need, think about your budget and what resources you can order, and involve your sponsors in those. So I think a big mistake that UIL coordinators can make is to just jump on the UIL website and order a bunch of things and hand it off to their sponsors and say, okay, this is what I ordered. Talk to your sponsors about what sorts of things they want. I have my sponsors at the beginning of every year provide me with a list of things that they want, and I ask them to prioritize that list. So they give me, literally everything. I tell them I shoot for the moon with the district, so you need to shoot for the moon with me. So everything that would be their dream to have, they give that to me in a list, but they have to prioritize it because I don't want to do that work for them. UIL provides great resources that are available for just a virtual download, so they're really quick. You don't have to wait for anything to come in the mail. That's a great place to start for new sponsors that are like, I don't know what I want. Those are at least great places for them to get started. And then also on the UIL website are additional third-party resources. And there's just tons of links of places that you can go to and find what works for you. But I think it's important to involve your sponsors in that decision, because the third-party company that my math sponsor wants to use is not the third-party company that my social studies sponsor wants to use. And that can be a little time-consuming for a UIL coordinator when you're having to get multiple POs together for different third-party vendors and things like that. But I think it goes a long way to making your sponsors feel comfortable utilizing resources that they think work best. I think you have to decide how many tournaments you can and want to attend. And I think you should decide that upfront so that you can tell your sponsors, we as a team are going to attend 3 practice tournaments in district or 2 practice tournaments in district, whatever you all decide and whatever your budget decides. Just remember, when you're thinking about tournaments, you've got to think about all of the costs associated with going to tournaments. So will the buses come out of your budget? So is that going to mean fuel and the bus driver? How will you feed students? Obviously, you've got to provide entry fees. Sponsors certainly need to attend so that you have graders and things like that there. You can find tournaments, the UIL calendar posts tournaments, and it will tell you on the UIL calendar if what test is being used, if it's the UIL A test or the UIL B test, or maybe it's a third-party test. So involve your sponsors in that conversation as well, because some of my veteran sponsors have really strong opinion about the third-party sources, and they have strong opinions about, we want to go to tournaments that use this particular vendor as opposed to another particular vendor. And I have a veteran, my math sponsor is incredibly talented, and he's been doing it for a very long time. And it is very important to him that we are at the UIL A test the first weekend it's available, and we're at the B test the first weekend that it's available. That's not important to other sponsors, but it's important to him. And so I try to honor that for him as much as possible. And you can also find and register for most of these tournaments on what's called Joy of Tournaments. And usually on the UIL calendar, there's a link right to their Joy of Tournaments page for you to be able to register. So the next thing that I think is important for a UIL coordinator is you've got to celebrate your success. The nature of UIL academics, I think, means that it doesn't naturally end up in the newspaper on its own. We kind of have to do that. So we have to be advocates for our program. And so my advice always is tell everyone about UIL academic success and tell them often. So if you are allowed to use your school announcements to celebrate students, certainly do that. You should send celebrations to the media, whatever policies are utilized in your district. So for us, we would send all of that to a communications person in our district, and then Ms. Clay would take care of sending things off to the newspaper. So whatever your district policy is, but try to get those sorts of things in the newspaper. Utilize social media. So a lot of times Ms. Clay doesn't want to put like every practice tournament we go to. She's like, well, that's too much for me to send press releases. So I'll post it at least on our UIL academic Facebook page and Twitter page so that people are still hearing about it, even if it doesn't end up in the newspaper necessarily. And I think that you should celebrate state competitors in really big ways. So I've always been a proponent at my district when we get ready to leave for state. I've always asked principals if we can do a state send-off. So can we have the drumline come out, and can we have, invite people from the district, invite people in the community, and do a big send-off for those students that are going to state, because that's a huge accomplishment and a lot of work. We also have a tradition at Athens where students who qualify to state have a big poster with their picture on it framed and hung in our hallways at Athens High School. So you can kind of see all of our state competitors since before I started at Athens. So it's probably, I guess, 12 or 13 years ago is when we started it. And I think that's a really neat goal for kids to have. So whenever like at our UIL recruiting event, whenever I'm talking to them about being prospective UIL students, I usually have them turn around and look at those posters and say, that should be your goal. It should be your goal to leave your imprint and leave your legacy on this high school. And here's how you can do that. I also think that you should ask to bring your students to school board meetings because I think you've got to celebrate that UIL success in front of school boards, and your school board knows what the football score was, and they know what the basketball score was. They don't necessarily just know what's going on in the world of UIL academics. So I ask for usually one day in the spring to just kind of talk to the school board about what we've been doing in UIL and what our successes have been. And I always bring students to that because it's what the school board really wants to see. They want to see students and not us. So I try to bring them to that. And then it also, a hint to an earlier slide too, it also helps you a lot when you go to ask for more money. It's harder for them to say no when they remember the kids that you took to those board meetings, because it makes it a little bit more difficult for them to say no to those. So yeah, people don't know about UIL academics, I think, in the way that they know about sports. And so we have to teach them and we have to keep them invested. And it's important that we use our time to advocate. The thing that's, I think, one of the most important things for me as a UIL coordinator is that I try to create a team atmosphere. At some point, whenever I first became the UIL coordinator, teams like traveled at all sort of different times. Like, if the social studies test wasn't until 2:00, the social studies sponsor would just take those kids at like 1 p.m. and they take their test and grade and leave. And it just felt really disjointed to me. And I thought, we really have to start celebrating each other's successes. Like, we were doing all these things, going to school board meetings and things like that, but it didn't feel like we were supporting each other's events as much. So we traveled together as a team. We traveled to and from tournaments together. If we stop and eat after a tournament, we do all of that together. I don't let students leave tournaments early with their parents unless there's an actual, like, if they have to, maybe work or get to another event or whatever. But students that just want to leave, like just because they're like tired of being at the tournament, I don't let those students leave, because my conversation with the students and with their parents is, your test may be over, but the rest of your teammates are still testing and the rest of your teammates are still competing. And so let's celebrate them. And like, we want to wait for awards and see how they do. I think part of that is making sweepstakes a goal for everyone. And the way that you do that, I think, is keeping them all at tournaments, talking to them about how many sweepstakes points we got from the math team, how many sweepstakes points did the social studies team give us, and kind of get everyone on board to winning those sweepstakes trophies at tournaments. Because I think that competitiveness is going to make everyone stronger. And I do think you've got to make things fun. So, it's one thing to be like, everyone has to get on the bus in the morning and everyone has to come back on the bus. I try to also make sure that we're having fun while we're there. So we do get to, one thing our district does for us to celebrate and incentivize UIL is that in the spring, after district, but before regionals, we get to have like a UIL fun day. And so everyone that competed at UIL district, regardless of whether or not they advanced, I get to plan something for them and we get to leave campus and just have kind of a reward trip. So that's something that is fun and neat for the kids and makes them feel special, I think. We do go eat after tournaments, which I know is a nightmare sometimes. And definitely, I think a lot of those nights, like, man, I'm ready to get home and no longer be on this school bus. But the kids, I think, have so much fun and there's so much bonding experience for them just to kind of relax for a little bit together after a tournament and eat. Now, we don't stop at like sit down restaurants or anything like that. I mean, they're just getting to go to Whataburger or whatever, but they really enjoy it. And then we try to make region and state really fun trips. So we established kind of traditions, especially for state, of like, when we go to state, we kind of do the same things. We visit the same places. We take the kids to the Capitol, kind of go eat at the same restaurants. So we have kind of our good luck traditions. I would encourage you to do the same thing for regionals. Athens has we've switched regions like every couple of years for the last 10 years. So we haven't done the same thing necessarily over and over again because we're going to different places, but we find something that we can do there for them to kind of celebrate and have fun. As you're working together as a team, always make sure that you have your sponsors check the conflict pattern. I always tell my sponsors that, especially what we do on the speech and debate team is I teach the kids what the conflict pattern is and how to read the conflict pattern. So I do that at the very beginning, and I encourage my sponsors to do the same thing, because the last thing we want is there to be conflict because a kid joined the math team and then now told somebody that he would do current issues and events, and no, he can't do those two things. And so now there's some sort of conflict. So I teach kids to read the conflict patterns. So I'm like, before you go tell somebody that you want to do this event, make sure you know what you're already committed to. And we do have UIL shirts. That's a bigger deal on some campuses than others. For us at Athens, we have standardized dress. And so UIL t-shirts are like very important for the kids, because on days that they get to wear those t-shirts, the rest of their class is wearing their like school uniform stuff. So UIL t-shirts are a really big deal for them. And so we have those shirts made and we wear those to tournaments, but then also we have days that they can wear them to school. And that's always something that's really exciting for them. It's really important to be clear about your expectations to students and also to your sponsors. So know the number of tournaments that you plan to attend, and you may have some individual groups that want to go to others in addition to those, but I suggest that you have 2 to 3 tournaments that are non-negotiable that the whole team travels to together. I say that because, again, my math sponsor, he's incredibly talented and he goes to typically 6 or 7 practice tournaments in a year. That's great, but that's not what works for every sponsor. And so I don't want to require all of them to go to 6 or 7, but we are all as a team going to at least go to the same 2 or 3. And by the way, even though I'm also the debate coach, I enforce this with the speech and debate team too. They can be the ones that are sometimes the most like, well, we're going to this other tournament. You all can go to that one. I enforce even with my speech and debate coach, like, y'all go to tournaments all year long. You're at least going to give me these 2 or 3, because the speech and debate team is just as much a part of the UIL academic team as the math team and the science team. Be clear with your sponsors about how often you want them to have practices and know when they'll be. So I don't set like all the UIL teams will practice Tuesday and Thursdays after school. I don't do that, but I do have an expectation for my sponsors of how often they'll practice. And then they communicate to me when they will be. So the math team, for example, practices like after usually athletic practices are over. So their practices actually don't start until like 6 o'clock. That's what works for him. My social studies sponsor has young kids, so he schedules his social studies practices around times that work for him as a family. I have people that use their lunchtime to have practices. I have sponsors that do practices in the mornings before school. It doesn't matter to me when they are, just so long as I know. And communicate how stipends are paid. You don't have to, your district, you have to communicate what you want to do with your district, but your district doesn't have to pay stipends like up front at the beginning of the year. It's okay. As long as your district approves. What we do at Athens is they have to like meet certain requirements and then they get their stipends at the end of the year. So if we get to March and a sponsor has not actually held a single practice, well, they've signed something with us that they understand that they won't get their stipend if they do that. And so if they've not held a single practice, they're not going to get their stipend. If they don't actually take a team to district, they're not going to get their stipend. So have those conversations with your district if that's something you feel like is important. I think you should also find out if your school has an A+ program, and you should work with that program. The best thing that I did 2 years ago was start working with UIL from 2nd grade up to high school. So and it was a huge learning curve for me too. So I grew up in UIL academics. Like, I did speech and debate in high school. I did ready writing. I was the UIL person in high school, but like A+ UIL was a totally new world for me. So it was really challenging to like feel like I had high school UIL, like I know all of the answers. And then I was like learning things about creative writing for the 2nd graders, and I was totally lost. But it was incredibly eye-opening for me as a high school academic coordinator to know what their events are at the elementary level, to know how they work, and to know which of those events correspond to the high school events. Because like I would have kids, like 9th graders, come to me and say, I want to do maps, charts, and graphs. And I was like, I don't know what that means. I need help. And so I started going to the lower grades to know what that means, so I could help them figure out what to do in high school. And then they knew my face because I started going to elementary competitions and the middle school competitions, and I started taking high school kids with me. So it just kind of has started to create like a feeder into our high school program. And it's been really exciting and challenged me a lot. I think you've got to celebrate those A+ successes too. So I started taking high school kids with me to the middle school and the elementary school district tournaments. Listen, especially elementary school, it was easy to take high school kids who were used to, like, I was like, I want you to come to this, extra UIL tournament with me. And they were like, but we have a Saturday off. And I was like, but in elementary, it's over by like 2. It's not like high school UIL. So I took some kids and we hung out with the elementary kids and celebrated their success. And I think that's going to make those kids, once they get to high school, then they're going to want to stay in UIL. So kind of my 3 takeaways, I guess, as a UIL academic coordinator is I think you have got to ask lots and lots of questions and make sure that you have all of the information. And I think you've got to spend a lot of time planning. Academic coordinators have to be really, really organized. And then I think you got to make sure that you have fun and your sponsors have fun and the kids have fun, because that's what keeps people wanting to do this activity. Competition is great and it's awesome for the kids to get really competitive. But if they're not also having fun, then that competition and that competitiveness can start to get negative. So we want to make sure that everybody's having fun. So I think UIL is an incredible organization, an incredible program. Like I said, I grew up in it in high school. So they've got 29 contests and roughly 500,000 students. And for 110 years, UIL has been providing kind of the guidance for public school academic contests. I gave you my email address. Please email if you have questions. Certainly, I think maybe you've included some questions in the chat box and I can take those. But if you think of questions later, or maybe it's a question you didn't want to ask out loud to everyone or whatever, please send me an email and I promise you that I will answer it. Because that's my favorite thing to do, is help other people be UIL sponsors and academic coordinators, because I could be on a commercial. By the way, Mr. Stevens, if you want to make a UIL commercial, like, I'm totally your person. I could be on a commercial for UIL. I think it's an awesome opportunity. All right, what questions?
We'll put you on the cereal box for sure.
Yeah, thanks. I'd love it.
Great. It's such great information, Nicole. Thank you very much for sharing it. I mean, from recruiting to when you talk about communicating your success, I think that's so important because as principals, as administrators, they have no idea what you have going on. And when we go to Capital Conference or student activities conferences, I'm always saying, tell them you took 36 kids to the student activities conference and all the great stuff that happened. Don't tell them about the 2 kids you lost and finally found before you came home, but just celebrate your successes. So thanks for sharing that. Also, thanks for the A+ plug, because it's a great, excellent program. And even Jose agrees. He's very excited about the A+ thing. And it's a golden jewel. And because high schools are already as a member of UIL, you can get all of the A+ information, the tests, the everything for free. It costs nothing extra to the district or to you. It would only cost time of getting those kids there and putting that meet together and any kind of awards that people give. So thanks for all that great stuff. We do have a couple of great questions. One was, do you have any ideas about how we can recruit virtually?
Oh, yeah. So I've started kind of some of these conversations about recruiting virtually. I think that what we're talking about right now is for our district, I think we're going to have to make some like short videos that we can send out, whether that's posting them on students' Google Classrooms or the district Facebook or social media accounts. I will also tell you my rule of thumb, I think, when you're making videos is people, unfortunately, will watch like the first 1 minute-ish of a video, and then either they're hooked or they move on. So we are going to make a lot of videos, but we're going to make a lot of them, and they're going to be very short. So we're not going to make one big, here's all of UIL everything video. We're going to do little vignettes about kind of each event to try to keep people actually watching them and not tuning out halfway through.
TikTok videos, basically.
Yes.
We had another question about someone who teaches at a 5th-6th grade campus. They asked for ideas about how to practice when some students cannot stay after school to practice, but they still want to participate. We had some great responses from colleagues about doing it during lunch, before school, even creating take-home materials for those students. And you also alluded to some of those. Do you have any other recommendations you'd like to make?
We use a lot of before school and we use a lot of lunch. We also, on our middle school campus, they have like intervention pull-out time for kids that maybe need STAR intervention. If your UIL kids don't fit into that box of needing STAR intervention, your middle school principal may let you use that time to pull other kids out, since kids are already being pulled out for STAR intervention. We do that a lot at our middle school. So while STAR pullout is happening, UIL pullout is also happening with kids.
Great. Question about how do you deal or can you utilize electronics? I have a lot of students who get really involved in their phones.
Yeah, a lot of the third-party resources for UIL are starting to transition all of their paper materials to electronic materials. So spelling is one that we used this year that was just 100% virtual. Like we didn't have any spelling materials. It was a program that we had a certain number of logins and kids logged into it, and they took quizzes and tests that way. Social studies this year did a mixture of hard copy and electronic medium. So definitely it's going to be, I think, what works for your sponsors too. You know, we've all been thrown into the technological deep end in the last few months. So some of your sponsors will be more excited about, like, I want 100% virtual. And some of them you may need to kind of ease into that. But a lot of third-party resources now have a combination of both of those that you could get for sponsors.
Great. And also, I just learned about Quizlet, which is an iPhone app, which is free, and you can create all sorts of study cards, and then people can share them and use them. So there's all sorts of resources like that these kids are buried in their phones. They can use them to study and that sort of thing, hopefully. So
Yeah, and they can share
There
them
may
back
be
and forth.
thousands of other. Yeah.
Yeah, so like our current events team and our social studies team uses that because there are so many flashcard things that are needed for those events. And so they divvy up the work. Like, this kid, you've got to make flashcards about, these 2 chapters of the book, and you've got to make them about these 2 chapters. And then they just share it for everybody. It's pretty cool.
It's great. So that's Quizlet, and I'm sure there's hundreds of others out there in the world as well. So feel free to share those with us. A question about, are there entry fees for A+ invitationals? And the A+ district meet materials UIL will provide for free. And I'm assuming if any invitationals for A+ would be the same as an invitational for high school, as they would charge fees to try to cover their costs and as a fundraiser. So do you have anything you want to add to that, or that you might know of, Nicole?
No, we really for A+ really just do district. We don't. Well, we have 3 elementary campuses, so we do host a city meet. We host a meet just with our 3 elementary campuses. But yeah, I would think for other invitationals, it's probably just to cover a limited cost, because they're not having to really pay for a whole lot of materials or anything to host.
Great. Do you have any secrets about sharing students with all other activities they're signed up for, sports, band, etc.?
I wish that I had a magic wand for that. I know we're a 4A high school, and so we are in that kind of middle where we do share our kids with everyone. One thing, I talked about my math sponsor. Like, he has practices. He doesn't start his practice until 6 o'clock, and that's to work around. For him, most of those kids are in band, so it's for him to kind of work around band sectionals and things like that. I do think it's important to try to be flexible. I try to keep in mind, like, a lot of times it's easier for 6 social studies kids to be flexible instead of asking 100-person band to be flexible about when they have their band practices. So I'll be honest and tell you, a lot of times it is us academics that budges and moves a little bit. But I also think that we have the flexibility probably to do that. So we try to be more flexible. And then I would say, again, open communication. So my band director and my athletic director has our UIL calendar usually by this time. But of course, who knows what anything looks like right now. But usually by this time, I've sent the band director and the athletic director what tournaments we're going to, so that they have a heads up and they're not blindsided by a kid showing up to band rehearsal on Monday and saying, oh, by the way, they know what to expect.
Great. Are there any available virtual videos state recommended to study for UIL?
I don't know of any videos necessarily to study for UIL, but that gives me an idea that I feel like we should make some.
Yeah. We do have this. We do some of the speech, state speech events that we record. Those are only in some of the debate rounds and informative persuasive speaking, because we're limited by copyright for like prose and poetry and some of those.
Right.
We have some informational videos that are quite old that were done a while back about each of the events, but nothing specifically targeting that. And you can find those on the UL website. And by starting the recording of all these Capital Conference sessions, we're really hoping we can ramp up and save some of these that we can keep as resources forever. Because we've always wanted to do something like this, and just we're never forced and pushed into doing it, and nor the resources, because it hadn't been bought. So now that we have Zoom capabilities for up to 300 people, we can do them all the time. So hopefully that'll get better. Hopefully that helps answers your question, Patty. A lot of great ideas, lots of thank yous are being posted in the comments. I have a question with Invitational A+. Some districts host their own. Oh, this is Robert explaining about the A+ thing. Thank you, Robert, for giving those tips. Sherry also recommends Kahoot and Quizzes for game-like review of materials. I'll read that to everybody who's going to be in the recording and not be able to read the chat. So Sherry says she uses those for AP government classes and her debate class and team. So good stuff. Great. So all the questions I'm seeing in our chat box, unless one pops up later, anything else you want to add that you thought of, Nicole?
I don't think so. Just definitely email me if you have any questions, or want to bounce ideas off of each other. Again, I learned a ton of this stuff from other Capital Conference presenters and things like that. So definitely we are better when we bounce ideas off of each other. So
I always say we're only as strong as our weakest link, and we are in this together as academic coordinators and coaches, and we need to be supporting each other the best that we can. And Nicole, I can't thank you enough, because you're one of those great ones who have lots of success, and people always ask you what's your secret, and you're like, there's not a secret, here's everything I do. And so
yeah.
great people are always willing to share what they do, because there is no secret. It just kind of happens, and a lot of hard work. So thanks for sharing your ideas, and we really appreciate it, and hope you're reading the chat box there, because you're getting lots of props and recommendations and thank yous and stuff. So thanks a lot for doing that. We're going to stop the recording, and we appreciate you attending.